So thanks very much, CEDA, for organising this important event, and Griffith's Asia Institute, of course, for its role, and all of you for investing your time in exploring what's happening in our neighbourhood, which is the core driver of global growth and our own prosperity in Australia. In my own contribution to the State of the Neighbourhood report, I note that settings that formerly provided stability are now in play, from the governance of global institutions to the guarantors of security, from driving many folks to seek out leaders who seem to offer strong and sometimes aggressive solutions. I'm going to ask just one question myself of the panel, and then I'm going to throw it open to you on the floor. Please start to think of your questions now. Please, I'd be grateful if you'd make them concise, if you'd say who you are and where you're from, if you wish to do that. And please, we're looking for questions. Your views are valued, but those of our panel are being prioritised today. Thank you. So my question is about what's happening right now. What do you think, our three distinguished panellists, what do you think will or should Australia seek from the APEC Leaders Summit coming up in Port Moresby in a few days? Maybe Philip, first of all.
Thanks, Rowan. Three things, I think. Firstly, APEC's got a great history in trying to drive economic liberalisation across our region, and particularly the trade facilitation agenda. Economic liberalisation is under threat globally as a result of a number of the developments that panellists have mentioned today. The first thing that APEC can deliver is a renewed commitment of the region to the economic liberalisation agenda. The second thing that I think APEC can deliver is a new voice for the Pacific. The first time that a meeting like APEC has been held in a Pacific country, the first time that Papua New Guinea has hosted an event of this scale. Nearly all, if not all, of the leaders of the Pacific will be there at the invitation of Prime Minister O'Neill. It's a real opportunity to showcase to the region and the world our neighbourhood, our family. And the third thing flows out of the announcements that the Prime Minister has made today and in recent days, and that is Australia is foursquare engaged in the Pacific. It's top foreign policy priority for it, and it's being backed by new resources.
Thanks very much, Philip. Helen.
Thank you. I'm going to agree broadly with Philip, because you're in a much stronger position to have the totality of a view, but I'd like to make a few qualifications. I think the voice of the Pacific is really critical, and for all of you that do business in the Pacific or have dealings with the Pacific, you know that it is dealing with poverty, it's dealing with capability challenges, it's dealing massively with the impacts of climate change, and it's small island states with massive oceans around them with all sorts of resources, so it's expensive. It's expensive to live there, it's expensive to work there. So I think that perspective of small island states coming into the APEC discussions is really important. But my plea would be that it's the totality of voices of the Pacific, and that's going back to the issue of whether the civil society members have a voice as well. The second, I'm not at all think is going to be an outcome, but I think that it would be a monumental step if there was some recognition about what the combined efforts of the APEC countries are doing in relation to their commitments arising from the Paris climate change talks, and putting climate change much more to the top of the agenda, because that is going to have economic impacts, and it's going to have impacts on all of those national economies directly or indirectly, one way or the other. And then I guess the third would be, and this again will be a challenge, but I think, as Philip said, Australia's very much pegged its colours to what its partnership role is in the Pacific. If it was possible that there was a greater level of coordination and cooperation in how we're working with the Pacific across the APEC countries, I think that would start to try to get to the core of what are sustainable solutions for some of the wicked problems faced by many of those countries.
Thanks very much, Helen. Denise?
I agree with both responses, and it would be remiss of me to not mention that at this really important forum, the role of and the attention to education across all sectors needs to be part of the conversation.
Thanks very much. And of course, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that APEC was, after all, an Australian initiative, and it's terrific that it should be the occasion of bringing together Pacific and Asia in this unique way, unique platform. Now, over to you.
My name's Greg Vickery from Norton Rose, Fulbright. My question is this: with the Modern Slavery Act, I guess due to be passed in Parliament next week, and New South Wales already has one, which is passed on the 30th of June, and given that this means that all large businesses in this country will have to report annually on what's happening in their supply chains, I'm just wondering what action is being taken by, I guess, perhaps it was a defect question, action being taken by the Australian government and others to help our friends in the neighbourhood to be able to comply with the requirements of the Modern Slavery Act, which means reporting on supply chains and whether there's modern slavery in the supply chains. And this will impact on the supply of goods, services, and indeed people who are moving to Australia to work. If there's any sense of trafficking, there'll be a problem under the Modern Slavery Act. I'm just wondering to what extent that's on the radar in terms of making sure our neighbourhood gets up to speed on this. I mean, New Zealand's got an act in prospect, so is Hong Kong. Singapore probably not far behind, but Australia's going to lead the way fairly shortly in this.
Thank you. Sorry, could I just get elucidation? You said New South Wales has passed, or it's the federal?
New South Wales has passed an act already.
The state, yeah.
The federal act should be passed next week.
Next week, thank you.
They're different acts too, by the way.
Thank you, Andrew. Really good question. Very important issue. This Australian government, the major intervention that it's taken in relation to modern slavery, as you know, has been to develop a government-business partnership across the region, in which former Foreign Minister Julie Bishop and Twiggy Forrest were most notable. And they launched with Retno Marsudi in Perth last year, a major new initiative for governments and businesses to work together. I don't know precisely what government is doing to support regional countries to be able to enact legislation like that, which is being enacted at the moment. But perhaps in a partnership with a firm like Norton Rose, we might be able to find a way of working together on that.
Thank you. Any other questions? No more questions from the floor? Please, sir. Yeah.
Stephen Fung from Griffith Asia Institute. I understand that the PM is going to review a $2 billion loans for Pacific countries for infrastructure. I'm wondering, this is more of a defect question. How do we avoid the China's problem, which is massive lending to these countries and potentially creating a debt problem? What's our unique approach in this? Thanks.
It's a good question. Look, the needs of the region are immense for infrastructure. the ADB calculates they're around $3 billion a year across the Pacific region. So there is certainly a need for infrastructure that can drive forward economic development. You're right to say that one of the issues here is the extent to which countries who are partners in this can afford repayment. Obviously, the Australian government would be only interested in doing this where a country, and it's not, we're not just countries, of course, it's also a project developer, would be able to repay. We think that new money for infrastructure is very important for our region, but that's got to be done in a way that is sustainable, that meets the needs of individual countries and doesn't add to debt burdens which countries can't manage. Some countries in the South Pacific, it's a very broad, disparate region, as we know. Some countries already have relatively high debt burdens, some have relatively low debt burdens. Some of the projects that would be funded to governments, some would be funded to private sector institutions where a burden wouldn't come on the government. So your question is a good one, and the answer is that very careful project selection and feasibility will be crucial in making sure that we don't add to problems and resolve them.
Thanks, Philip. I might just ask a question about investment, because that's in the title of this lunch session. And it seemed to me for a long time that Australia has been underinvested in both the Pacific and in Asia. Wondering why there's so little investment. It has struck me that we have virtually no single person in decision-making areas of major corporations, government departments, except for DFAT, of course, political parties, universities, or media organisations who've got experience of living and working in Asia and the Pacific. I'm wondering whether this might be one of the reasons, but we do seem to be very underinvested, whereas other countries gain a better understanding and indeed empathy for the region by having a lot of companies there, a lot of senior people, and gaining better economic understanding as well of the needs of those places. Why are we so, our investment goes so much to America, Europe?
Well, first of all, to be fair to those heads of Australian government departments who have served overseas, and I'm thinking here of the head of our intelligence agency, the head of our Attorney General's department, the head of our Defence Department, as well as the head of the Foreign Affairs Department, there's plenty of them out there who know an awful lot about the region. You're right, the Australian level of investment across the region is not large. That's not something which is in the hands of the government.
No, it's not. No, it's an Australia-wide question, I think.
We have to be realistic about the nature of our economy. We are a capital importing, not a capital exporting country. The reason why we are able to drive massive investments in, for instance, LNG off the coast of Western Australia is very largely as a result of inward investment, not outward investment. The other thing is that the nature of our savings pool is that it is deployed to superannuation funds. Superannuation funds rightly make their own decisions about where they put all of our money. No role for government in telling superannuation funds where they ought to put their money. They make decisions about long-term benefit, and I guess those super fund managers who I talk to say that their principal interest is in the security of the money that we put in there. So they look for environments which are relatively low risk. And although the environments of our near region are high opportunity, they are relatively high risk. So I think that goes some way to answering your question,
Okay,
Ryan.
thanks.
So I guess what it raises for me is, so I don't know whether your statement is accurate or not. I gather it is. But what it raises for me is that if there is to be a partnership as opposed to a benefit, a one-way benefit, that's where I think this issue of, understanding a country and what the basis of a country is, what the culture of a country is, and, what's the mutuality of benefit that can be got from it. And I think that is a challenge for all of us. So my own organisation is trying to think about nationalisation, not parachuting expats in to sort out problems. I think that for companies, private companies that work in many different parts of the world, that there is a real challenge beyond the Modern Slavery Act about looking at how they actually gain benefits in those countries and consult and connect with those countries, and I guess that's true of government as well. So my addition to that, I guess, is that where we are making those investments, it should be about mutual benefit, not just about a one-way kind of stream back into the benefits or interests of Australia.
And yes, investment is demand. It naturally requires mutual benefit. Just putting things on ships and sending them may be different. Any other questions out there?
There's one there, Padre.
Sorry, yes.
Hi, thank you. Luis Cabrera from Griffith Asia Institute. So Dr. Sok had mentioned some of the efforts to suppress civil society activities. And when we speak of influence and investment in influence, one of the real engines that countries like Australia often look to is civil society within countries, ways to spread influence. But countries both democratic and more authoritarian leading are getting increasingly sophisticated at suppressing the ability of civil society to reach beyond the national borders to get support, to get funding. India has defunded now, I think, 16,000 of its 40,000 registered NGOs. They can no longer receive foreign funding. They're not authorized. So in such a climate, which we seem to be trending that way, what can an organization such as Oxfam do to try to still engage with civil society within various countries? What can DFAT do? What can educators do?
Yeah, China's the same, of course.
Yes. So I can speak on behalf of an organisation like Oxfam. So the challenge for us is that we are in many places. I mean, Bangladesh is another example where we're one of the few NGOs that have been registered by the current government, and many of the others have been deregistered. And I think it's a very careful balancing act. In most of these countries, we have national staff. We don't have expat staff. And certainly in a lot of these countries, the advocacy component of our work within the country as well as globally can have an impact on the safety and security of staff. But from our perspective, we're very committed to remaining and working with partner organisations, and for civil society organisations, community support organisations on the ground, determining the pace and the tenor and the volume of what the particular advocacy might be in that country. And inevitably, it means there have to be hard decisions that have to be made. But Oxfam's one of the few NGOs that's operating inside Syria at the moment. And we have the opportunity to try to maintain an impartial humanitarian mandate in the work that we're doing there, but it also provides the opportunity to have those quiet conversations about what's happening as the country regroups around the conflict and what's going to happen, in the future. So that we have to balance it, but we're very committed to trying to remain, and that causes conflicts for us at times. So the most obvious one is with the mass evacuation of the Rohingya population out of Myanmar. What can we say globally, and what impact does that have on the programs and partners that we work with in Myanmar, given the response there? So there's enormous complexity in it. I think the key, though, is if this continues, movements will erupt, and take you back to the Ban Ki-moon quote that people will not remain suppressed in terms of their voice, and the alternative is not very attractive if it gets out of hand in many of the countries that we're working in.
Thanks very much, Helen. Well, I think we're winding up now, and I'd like you all to join me in thanking Helen, Philip, and Denise for their contribution.